When a corrupt anti-Trump judge humiliates Melania Trump in court, he thinks he's above the law. But when his target fights back, karma hits fast, leaving the entire courtroom in stunned silence. The day started like any other in the federal courthouse, except for Judge Marshall Davis's particularly foul mood. "I said no coffee in my courtroom," he barked at his clerk, making the young woman flinch. "And tell that defense team if they're not here in 2 minutes, I'm issuing contempt charges." The packed gallery watched as Davis stormed to his bench, his face already flushed with irritation. His reputation for harsh treatment was well known, but lately, his behavior had become increasingly erratic, especially in cases involving conservative figures. "Your Honor," the court clerk approached cautiously, "Mrs. Melania Trump has arrived for her testimony." Davis's expression darkened instantly. "Well, isn't that special?" he sneered, not even attempting to hide his disdain. "Make sure she knows this isn't a campaign rally. In my courtroom, her title means nothing." The atmosphere shifted noticeably when Melania Trump entered. She moved with quiet dignity, nodding respectfully to the court staff. Davis watched her like a hawk, drumming his fingers impatiently on the bench. "Let's get something straight," Davis announced, his voice dripping with contempt. "I don't care who you are outside these walls. In this courtroom, I am the law. Is that clear, Mrs. Trump?" Melania's measured response only seemed to irritate Davis further. "Crystal clear, Your Honor. I am here simply as a witness to the truth." "Truth?" Davis scoffed. "We'll see about that." His gaze shifted to the defense table. "Now, let's get this circus started." For the record, Davis interrupted the defense attorney's opening statement. "I'm already tired of the political theatrics in my courtroom." He shot a pointed look at Melania Trump. "This isn't a fashion show or a press event." The defense attorney tried again. "Your Honor, we are simply establishing the context of Mr. Sterling's charitable." "The context?" Davis barked out a laugh. "The context is that your client is accused of tax evasion. Period. I don't need a history lesson about his so-called charitable work." Every time the attorney mentioned Sterling's community contributions, Davis cut him off with increasing hostility. "Irrelevant. Move on. I won't warn you again." His gavel slammed down so often the court reporter had trouble keeping up. When it was time for Melania's testimony, Davis's behavior became even more erratic. "Stand up straight when you take the oath," he snapped, though her posture was impeccable. "And speak clearly. I won't have any political doublespeak in my court." "Your Honor," Melania began calmly, "I can attest to Mr. Sterling's financial transparency regarding the Faith and Family Foundation." "Oh, here we go," Davis interrupted, rolling his eyes theatrically. "Another conservative fairy tale about family values." The gallery stirred uncomfortably. Even the prosecution looked uneasy at the judge's obvious bias. But Davis was just getting started. "Let me be clear," he leaned forward, his face reddening. "I've seen enough rich conservatives try to hide their money behind charitable facades. Your presence here doesn't impress me, Mrs. Trump. In fact, it makes me question the defendant's character even more." Melania remained composed, but something in her calm demeanor seemed to further enrage Davis. The judge's hands trembled slightly as he shuffled through his papers, his eyes darting nervously to specific documents on his desk. "I have here," Melania continued steadily, "documented evidence of Mr. Sterling's charitable contributions, including the March Foundation meetings. Those records are inadmissible." Davis practically shouted, though no objection had been raised. His reaction seemed oddly personal, almost panicked. "Your Honor," the defense attorney stood, "on what grounds are you? Don't you dare question my rulings." Davis's face was now bright red. "One more word, and you'll be joining your client in contempt." The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably in his seat. This was beyond judicial discretion, it was starting to look like a personal vendetta. "Your Honor," Melania spoke up, her voice remaining respectfully firm. These documents were properly submitted during discovery. Oh, were they? Davis sneered. And I suppose your fancy Trump connections had nothing to do with that? Let me tell you something about your kind, Mrs. Trump. You think you can waltz into my courtroom with your political privilege and... Objection, Your Honor, the defense attorney found his courage. This is completely inappropriate. Silence. Davis roared, slamming his gavel so hard it echoed through the chamber. I will not be lectured about appropriateness in my own court, especially not by some conservative puppet. Davis glared at Melania Trump, his fingers tightening around his gavel. The tension in the courtroom was palpable, the gallery murmuring as they sensed something was shifting. For the first time, the once confident judge seemed uncertain. This is my courtroom, Davis snapped, forcing himself to regain control. And I will not allow you or your legal team to grandstand with baseless accusations. Melania remained poised. Your Honor, I would not call documented financial transactions baseless. The judge's face twitched. Those documents are not admissible, he repeated, his voice rising. And if you insist on discussing them further, I will have no choice but to hold you in contempt. The defense attorney stepped in. Your Honor, that would be a clear abuse of judicial authority. Mrs. Trump is merely presenting evidence relevant to this case. Davis slammed his gavel again. Irrelevant. Actually, Melania interjected, I believe it is very relevant, considering these financial records indicate a direct correlation between campaign donations and case rulings. A hushed gasp rippled through the room. The prosecutor, who had been mostly silent until now, shifted uncomfortably. Your Honor, if I may. You may not. Davis interrupted, his voice shaking with anger. We are done entertaining this nonsense. Melania's expression remained unreadable, but her voice was unwavering. Your Honor, you seem rather eager to shut down any mention of these financial records. Davis's face was now a shade of deep crimson. I will not be interrogated in my own courtroom. Then perhaps we should let the FBI do the questioning, Melania suggested smoothly. Silence fell over the room. For a brief moment, Davis looked as though he had been struck. Excuse me, he managed, his voice barely above a whisper. Melania calmly placed a sealed envelope on the defense table. Your Honor, we have already submitted this evidence to federal authorities. This includes offshore account transactions linked directly to your rulings in high-profile conservative cases. The entire courtroom was stunned. The judge sat frozen, his fingers twitching as if unsure whether to reach for his gavel or flee. This is outrageous, he finally bellowed. You think you can? A loud knock echoed at the courtroom doors. The gallery turned as federal agents entered. Judge Marshall Davis, the lead agent announced, stepping forward. You are under federal investigation for judicial misconduct and bribery. Davis bolted up from his chair. You can't do this. I am a federal judge. The agent didn't flinch. And you are also subject to the law. Melania watched quietly as the agents approached the bench. The weight of the moment pressed down on the courtroom, the reality of Davis's downfall sinking in. Davis's breathing was ragged. You, he pointed a trembling finger at Melania. You set me up. No, she replied. You set yourself up. The judge looked around desperately, but there was no escape. As the agent stepped forward, he made a last, desperate attempt at control. I am the law, he screamed. You have no idea what you're doing. I have connections. But his words were cut off as the federal agents placed him in handcuffs. The courtroom was silent as the once powerful judge was led away, his cries of protest fading into the background. The reality of justice served settled over the room. Melania Trump stood tall, her expression calm. The battle had been won, not with force, but with truth. As the courtroom doors swung shut behind Judge Davis, a stunned silence lingered in the air. The gallery, once murmuring with hushed speculation, now sat in speechless disbelief. The weight of what had just transpired had yet to fully settle. Melania Trump remained composed, her hands clasped in front of her. Despite Davis's downfall, she knew the fight wasn't over yet. Corruption ran deep, and the next steps were critical. The lead FBI agent turned toward the remaining court officials. "This courtroom is now part of an active federal investigation," he announced. "All proceedings related to Judge Davis's past rulings will be reviewed." Gasps and whispers rippled through the chamber. This was unprecedented. A federal judge arrested mid-trial? The ramifications were enormous. The prosecutor, looking visibly shaken, cleared his throat. "Your Honor," he hesitated before realizing the seat at the bench was now empty. "That is. I mean, we need clarification on how to proceed." One of the senior clerks stepped forward, her voice firm despite the unease in the room. "A replacement judge will be assigned," she said. "Until then, this case is suspended." Melania took a deep breath, exchanging a glance with the defense attorney. They had come here today expecting resistance, but this? This was beyond what anyone could have anticipated. She turned to the agent. "What happens now?" The agent gave her a knowing look. "Now, we take this beyond the courtroom." The media had already caught wind of the scandal, and within hours, news outlets across the country were ablaze with headlines. Breaking: Federal judge arrested on bribery charges mid-trial. Melania Trump exposes courtroom corruption. FBI uncovers network of judicial bribes, more arrests to follow. Inside a sleek news studio, a political commentator shook his head at the camera. "This isn't just about one corrupt judge," he said gravely. "If the allegations are true, this could unravel an entire network of judicial misconduct." Across the country, people were taking sides. Some celebrated the takedown, calling it a win for justice. Others, particularly Davis's political allies, scrambled to defend him, claiming it was all a setup. But the real battle had only just begun. Back in Washington, D.C., powerful figures were on edge. If Davis had been accepting bribes, who else was involved? Names started circulating: other judges, politicians, and corporate donors who had allegedly benefited from Davis's rulings. Melania knew she had to stay ahead of this. The evidence they had uncovered was only the tip of the iceberg. Late that night, she met with the lead FBI investigator at a private location. "We need full protection for our whistleblowers," she said firmly. "If there's a larger conspiracy, they'll try to silence anyone who speaks out." The agent nodded. "We're already on it. But this goes deeper than we thought. Offshore accounts, secret meetings, intimidation tactics, it's bigger than just Davis." Melania's expression didn't waver. "Then we take them all down." As the sun rose over Washington, D.C., the fallout from Judge Davis's arrest continued to unfold. News stations ran continuous coverage, digging deeper into the corruption scandal that now threatened to shake the foundations of the judicial system. Inside an undisclosed government office, Melania Trump sat across from the lead FBI investigator. The walls were covered with documents, photographs, and connections between Davis and other suspected officials. "This goes further than we imagined," the agent admitted, rubbing his temple. "The evidence you brought us, combined with what we've uncovered, confirms that Davis was just one piece of a much larger operation." Melania remained focused. "Then we move forward. What's our next step?" The agent exhaled. "We issue more arrests." Within 24 hours, the FBI conducted a series of coordinated raids. For more judges, 2 prominent politicians, and multiple corporate executives were taken into custody. The headlines were relentless. Police car light, federal crackdown, more high-profile arrests in judicial corruption scandal. Police car light, bribery network exposed, how deep does the corruption go? Police car light, Melania Trump's fight against corruption sparks nationwide probes. Public reaction was immediate. Protests erupted in front of courthouses, with crowds chanting for justice. Others, especially those with political ties to the accused, denounced the investigation, calling it a witch hunt. One thing was clear: this scandal had reached the highest levels of power. Inside the courtroom, a new judge had been appointed to review the cases Davis had previously presided over. As expected, multiple convictions were overturned, and wrongfully accused individuals were finally exonerated. Melania Trump was present when the first of these cases was dismissed. An elderly woman, who had been unjustly penalized due to Davis's biased rulings, openly wept as the verdict was overturned. "I thought I'd lost everything," she whispered. "Thank you." Melania placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Justice always wins in the end." The room erupted in applause. Back in Washington, the political ramifications were still being felt. "What do we do about this?" a prominent senator demanded during a closed-door meeting. "This investigation is turning into a political earthquake." "There's no stopping it now," another official admitted. "The truth is out." Even those who had once been skeptical of Melania's fight against corruption were now forced to acknowledge the depth of the scandal. "She did what no one else had the courage to do," a commentator admitted on live TV. "She exposed the rot within our system. And now, there's no going back." A few weeks later, Melania Trump stood before a packed audience, delivering a speech about accountability and justice. "This is not about politics," she said firmly. "It's about doing what is right. Corruption has no place in our judicial system. And as Americans, we must always fight for the truth." The crowd erupted into cheers. Final impact. Multiple high-profile convictions. Millions of dollars in hidden bribes uncovered. Sweeping reforms introduced to prevent future judicial corruption. Melania Trump recognized as a national advocate for justice. The fight had been long. The battle had been difficult. But in the end, the truth had prevailed. Justice has been served. If you stand for truth and accountability, subscribe and hit the bell icon for more inspiring stories. God bless you, and God bless America. United States.